We are going to get started with our first panel, and it is called Getting to Ukrainian Victory. Ukraine, of course, as we all have mentioned, hangs over this conference as it did last year. This year, hopefully next year, our title can be Victory in Ukraine. But we're going to start with Getting to Victory in Ukraine with our moderator, Jonathan Tepperman, who's my longtime friend and now colleague at the George W. Bush Institute, the editor-in-chief of our Catalyst online journal, and Jonathan will introduce our panel. So panel for the first one, come on up, please.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you, David, for that introduction. Thank you so much to Evelyn and Nino and all of the organizers and to all of you for being here. Welcome to our first panel on Getting to Ukrainian Victory. As David said, I'm Jonathan Tepperman from the Bush Institute. Because this topic is at the front of all of our minds, I'm not going to make any kind of an introduction. Let me just welcome our panelists, and then we'll start right in with questions. I'm honored to share the stage today with General Ben Hodges, who is now at Human Rights First, Alexander Shulga, Chargé d'Affaires at the Ukrainian Embassy here in Tbilisi, Linas. Thank you. I'm not so good with Lithuanian names. A former defense and foreign minister of Lithuania, and Ambassador Bill Taylor, a former US ambassador to Ukraine, who's now at the United States Institute of Peace. I want to start with an opinion poll, and I'm just going to ask you to raise your hands. Does anyone on this stage think that Washington has a complete plan to help Ukraine actually win the war? That's what I thought. Okay, we'll come back to this topic. But Alexander, let me start with you as the one Ukrainian on our panel. What kind of help does Ukraine need the most from the international community right now?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My first grateful words for organizers. You know you are the best. Thank you very much. And back into your question. I can divide these needs for Ukraine on three directions. First one is the military assistance for win on battlefield. Second one is funding to support our budget and to cover all social costs. And the third one is logistical supporting. For example, for restoration of social energy infrastructure in Ukraine, as well as for supporting ordinary people with daily needs, products and goods. And of course, the military assistance is the first priority because we still need to protect our sky. You see every day we challenge of our infrastructure, especially in Odessa, due to the destroying the grain deal. And of course we need the modern aircrafts, long-range missiles, electronic warfare equipment. And of course we liberated our territory. And we need as well demine this territory, and we need demining equipment and specialists to protect our citizens, and also we need demining equipment for further liberation of our territory. So it's the top priorities for Ukraine now.
Thank you, Alexander, and I think we'll come back to various parts of that in the discussion. Ben, I want to turn to you now because it's not every day that I get to sit next to an American three-star general. So,
crushing letdown.
Tell us first how you think the war is going right now, because we read and hear, and I'm sure all of you do, very different assessments of the success or not of the counteroffensive, and that can be hard for civilians like us to interpret.
So. I get accused of being a Ukrainian cheerleader. Absolutely, I am. I believe completely that Ukraine is going to win this war. The amount of time it takes depends a lot, mainly on the United States and on Germany and other countries continuing to support Ukraine. Having said that, I think it's important that we look at the counteroffensive as more than just the ground part. I mean, that's only a part of this, this war, which, by the way, we're expecting Ukrainian soldiers to do something we would never ask American soldiers, British soldiers, German soldiers, Polish. We would never send our troops into a battle like this without total air superiority and all the best possible equipment. And yet they're getting critique from about 8,000 miles away. So nonetheless, they're still achieving some success there. But this is just a part of the counteroffensive. Drone strikes are hitting cities all over Russia. Russian airports are being disrupted. That has an impact on Russian economy when in a country that size, you can't fly from city to city. And obviously, it also undermines trust that people might have or confidence they might have in their own government. The Great Black Sea Fleet doesn't want to go anywhere close to the Ukrainian coastline, and Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. And it's because of their anti-ship missiles and the drones that they're using to keep the Black Sea Fleet away. And also, air defense has been so effective that in 18 months, Russia has not destroyed not one convoy, not one train bringing equipment from Poland into Ukraine. That's incredible. I mean, that's job one for the Russian Air Force, and they've not been able to do it. So right now, while we're sitting here, sabotage attacks are happening all around Crimea. So in my view, it's going to be expensive, painful, long, but that noose is tightening tighter and tighter around Crimea, and it's just a matter of time.
So to pick up on the football reference that a senior Ukrainian official used a few months ago when he said, we're just at the end of the first half or the beginning of the second. Do you think we're still there, or have we moved further forward?
I love that. This morning, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to see my team, Florida State, beat LSU 45-24.
I was talking about European football, not America.
It doesn't matter. The metaphor is still the same. Florida State was trailing in the beginning, 14-7. At the end of the game, they scored 4 touchdowns, pouring it on. This is what's going to happen. Look, all the criticism of the counteroffensive and what Ukraine is doing only looks at the Ukrainian side. There's a Russian side to this equation. The Wagner mutiny, the public assassination of Prigozhin, this has revealed what we always suspected, the very fragile nature of the Russian hierarchy. What the Russians have learned, loyalty means more than competence. All the best or the most effective generals are either dead, in jail, or have been sacked. And Gerasimov and Shoigu, fortunately, are still in their jobs. And so you can be sure that there's no Russian officer that's going to push up and say, hey, we need to change. This is not working. We have problems over here. As long as they remain quiet, then Ukraine is going to continue moving forward.
Thank you, Ben. Linas, I'm going to ask you a question about American football, too. That's okay, right?
Let's better talk basketball after yesterday.
Our congratulations.
Well said.
So for much of this war, Europe has remained remarkably unified, much more so than I think a lot of experts expected at the beginning. Is that unity still as strong as ever? And how should we interpret some of the comments we've been hearing lately, like, for example, those from our dear friend President Sarkozy in France? Is that a sign that some leaders in some countries are starting to wobble or not?
No, first, let me thank the organizers that I'm again here, back, the same place, same people, same faces. Unfortunately, not so much changes in Georgia itself, but that's another story, another panel probably. Talking about Ukraine, a title of our discussion, Victory of Ukraine. You know, incantations, if General will agree with me, will not help. Fortune tellings will not help. You know, we should work persistently, hardly, and since very beginning. So a lot of minds coming after your question, what we did, how we performed, like, you know, heroism of Ukrainians, first of all, while we were contemplating how much we should do, how deep we should go, and how brave we should be, they were fighting at that time, at the same time, and being killed. So the price was quite high. After a year and a half of the war, a lot of things happened. And we were really doing, not just Europeans, as you're asking, but all democratic society, community, saying that, you know, Ukrainians fighting for us all, for our values. But we couldn't understand, and still probably in mess, not only in Europe, but also overseas, what we would like to achieve. what's our ultimate goal? Do we really mean when we're saying that Ukraine must win? And do we understand that at the same time Russia must lose? This is for some too hard, you know, even now too hard to contemplate. Maybe these people are not loud enough, but they still believe that after everything will be over, they will have business with Putin. I met these people myself. I know they're existing. And, you know, this is really quite frustrating. So after all in all, we are performing, we are doing, and messages for Putin are not good, you know. First line of defense looks like being breached, right? The information. Our support, military support, still increasing. Although fighters not here, long-range artillery should be more, but nevertheless, it's moving at a big extent, right? Well, these illusions of Putin that West will force Ukraine to negotiate at the expense of their own territory, also failing. So all bad news. So that means we are moving, right? So the answer is positive. But at what expense, at what price? This is another question. And are we really capable to meet these challenges properly, in time, and with this kind of dignity?
Thank you, Linas. Bill, this one's for you. One of the things that I find, or perhaps the thing I find most confusing about the Biden administration's current position on the war is the ongoing reluctance to supply Ukraine with advanced weapon systems like ATACMS and fourth-generation fighter planes, such as F-16s. Early in the war, a lot of people thought the Biden administration was doing a good job of slowly managing the escalation of support. But now, this hesitation, this slow roll, is much harder to understand because, of course, we have blown through every Russian red line that Putin has set, and there has been no response. So how are we supposed to interpret the fact that the administration in Washington is still being so cautious?
Jonathan, you're exactly right, that we have blown through these so-called red lines. I don't think there are such things as red lines. I think that's a bad concept. But we've done exactly what you said, that has gone up the ladder on weapon systems, on volumes of weapon systems, on the quality of weapon systems. And that will continue. I am absolutely convinced that will continue for the reasons that you said. The administration has blown through these, and they will continue. My bet, you mentioned F-16s, that decision's made. You know, they've made that decision. With the Germans, they made the tank decision. I am sure that they're going to very soon make the ATACMS decision, maybe with the Germans as well, the TARS. So I think what we can look for is a continuation of that. Too slow? Totally agree. Should have been faster? Totally agree. Should have been there sooner? Totally agree. The counteroffensive that General Hodges talked about could be farther along right now had we done that sooner. But my prediction is it's coming.
But you didn't answer the question as to why, right?
Why?
What explains the reluctance?
Because there's no good reason. There is no good reason. I mean, you said it yourself, Jonathan. This red line notion, you know, it's not a good reason. There is no good reason. That's why I say it's coming.
Thank you. Ben, I want you to come in on this one too. What do you think? After all, you've said that U.S. fears that it will run out of ATACMS does BS translate into Georgian? I think so. And it's not like there's any shortage of F-16s, right? Countries are literally ready to give these away. So what do you think is going on?
I think, first of all, our president, who has done a terrific job of keeping 50 nations focused on the task. I mean, I'm sure nobody in the Kremlin dreamed that that would be the case, that Germany would be the #2 provider or contributor, these kind of things. So the president deserves huge credit for that, but he has stopped short of doing the most important task, which is to describe our objective. What is the purpose? Why are we spending almost $100 billion so far in other nations? Why are we doing it? And I think once the president says, you know, to the American people, by the way, in over a year, he has not looked into a camera and spoken to the American people from the Oval Office about this. I don't understand that. But when he says it's in the best interest of the United States that Russia is defeated, that Ukraine ejects Russia back to the 1991 borders, that they win. Once he does that, then there's no more excuses about, you know, the M1 tank is a terrible tank. I wonder why the hell do we have them I heard so many critiques of the Abrams tank last year, or how long it takes to train an F-16 pilot, or we don't have enough ATACMS. I've heard 4 different reasons why no ATACMS. Number 1, first, we're not sure they'll work. Then number 2, we don't have enough. And then number 3, we're worried they might use them against Russia. And then number 4, we don't have enough. I mean, it keeps circling back. It's like a kid coming up with excuses for not doing something, and it's a lack of will, not a lack of ATACMS. And I think, of course, I don't know. I'm an old retired guy. I have zero responsibility for anything. The president literally has the weight of the world on his shoulders, but I think they have continued to worry too much about the possibility of escalation to using a tactical nuclear weapon. I think this is extremely unlikely they will do it. The Russians, they see that their nuclear weapons are actually most effective when they don't use them, because they see that we continue to stop. And a lot of other countries are taking note of that. I think they also are not sure what happens when Ukraine achieves catastrophic success. They don't know how to control that. And for a lot of people who invested their professional life in a stable Russia, this will be very, very difficult to deal with. And then finally, I think China it has some role in this, that the Chinese do not want to see a collapse of the regime and are tapping the brakes, saying, don't let that happen.
Linas, since Ben just mentioned fear of Russian escalation, I want to turn now to you because, of course, Lithuania is a frontline state in the war. And so a threat that Putin makes, I'm sure, resonates very differently there than it does in Paris or in Washington. How worried is the Lithuanian government or the Lithuanian public that at some point Putin will escalate, expand the war, or find some other way to retaliate against Ukraine's friends?
First of all, we have to be consistent. And when you're asking about feelings of Lithuanians, we still remember, and I still remember 1990, this freedom fight, our liberation, and when agents from the West were coming to Lithuania and urging us not to damage Gorbachev. Don't do anything, don't spoil the game because it will be worse and you should stay calm. We couldn't understand that, and when we're talking about values, talking about freedom, and we always quite gifted to talk about that, but let's understand the meaning. So here, this is the situation exactly about that. And when we are trying to teach Ukrainians how to fight, when they're trying to teach them that they should behave, it sounds a bit cynical, and some hypocrisy at the same time. By the way, coming back to the previous topic, when we are providing not enough weapons, as it was said quite recently, for ensuring efficient counteroffensive. At the same time, we're surprised that counteroffensive is not so efficient. At the same time, since it's not so successful, the lack of enthusiasm to continue with the support, and so it's a circle, which smells a bit as hypocrisy, basically. And we have to admit, Ukrainians must be polite because they are being supported. And I remember in Vilnius summit, if you remember this tweet of Zelensky, some were quite insulted how he was so rude, how not so say thankful. And then he thanked, if I remember correctly, journalists counted 45 times or whatever. So everybody was satisfied. But what we're talking about at the end of the day, so this is the case. So Lithuanians, as you are asking me, still remember that. So why we are supporting Ukraine wholeheartedly, not as a government, but also the people, NGOs, everyone. We are a small country, we're not impressed by quantity, and that's needless to say. But we really are doing whatever we can personally, as a citizens, as a country. And this exactly, then we really can ask others to do the same. So this is now this is a moment of truth. Even after a year and a half of this fight, we're still talking about simple, elementary things. But we have to talk and have to implement.
Thank you, Linas. Alexander, I want to ask about the other war that Ukraine is fighting right now, and that's the war against corruption. Since the beginning of Russia's recent invasion, there have been a number of high-profile cases where high-level officials have been removed because of corruption. Yesterday, of course, President Zelensky announced that he was replacing Defense Minister Resenkovs. First, what impact will the departure of Reznokov have on the war? And then second, are all of these stories about people being fired for corruption a sign that Ukraine is winning the war because it's doing a good job in finding and punishing corruption, or is it a sign that Ukraine is losing the war against corruption because there are still so many corrupt people in positions of power?
Well, in ideal conditions, there is no place for corruption in high developed and democratic state. Unfortunately, we are living not in an ideal world, and in such circumstances for Ukrainian in the state of war, with zero tolerance to corruption and with fighting against corruption in Ukraine, all these steps are essential for our future victory over Russia Federation. And we see that in time of war, Ukraine continues to implement reforms in anti-corruption sphere. Our anti-corruption system that built from scratch is operating on a full capacity. And of course, we are waiting for new news from this battlefield as well. And back into Mr. Reznikov, he done a very great job. He worked more than 500 days on its post, and of course we have to be thankful for them.
Thank you. Bill, can I ask you what impact, if any, you expect Reznikov's departure to have on the campaign?
So, Jonathan, as you know, Minister Reznikov and probably his successor, Minister Umerov, focuses not on the day-to-day fight, not on the military aspect. They have a very good set of generals. It's not just General Zaluzhny, it's General Syrsky and others that are fighting. And they're doing a great job. I would just say also that this counteroffensive actually is going reasonably well. I mean, they are taking back land. They have breached the first line, this Russian line. So they're making progress. That's not what Reznikov does. That's not what the minister does. So I don't think there is going to be a big effect. You're going to have the continuation of a strong military focus there and success. And the new minister will do well as well. And getting the weapons. I mean, that's what Reznikov has done. He's done it well. By the way, I was just exchanging notes with him this morning. He says his wife is very happy that he's not in that same job. But he also has great confidence in Minister Umerov.
I wanted to join by saying that I do not believe that something will be spoiled or damaged, first of all. Second, while war is going on, Ukraine is continuing reforms, continuing integration processes to NATO, to European Union. There are concrete, very measurable tasks to be executed. And one of the major tasks is fight with corruption. So regardless everything, it was said, it's a very strong message, regardless everything, regardless achievements on the front, there were corruption in the defense ministry. And this is the reaction. Also arrest of Kolomoisky, I would add also. He was supporter of Zelensky, let's remember. He was a lie, and in spite of everything, this decision was taken. So that's a good example, model action for others that you have to perform. You have to do what you are saying. And this is not just to impress somebody, but just to say that they are really serious about what they're doing.
So Ben, you told us a moment ago that you're retired and not responsible for anything anymore. So I'm going to interpret that as a sign that you can be completely blunt and honest and impolitic in the answer to the question I'm about to ask you. I want to talk about signaling. Since the start of the war, a number of United States government officials, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, have made public comments suggesting that Ukraine should negotiate. Do you think those comments send the wrong signals to Moscow?
It's terrible. when American officials or other officials openly talk about, that the objective is we want to help Ukraine be in the best position to negotiate. Why don't we want them to be in the best position to actually win? And I think the Ukrainians understand, they know what's waiting for them if they stop short. If there's some sort of a pause, a drawn out ceasefire, they know, first of all, there's zero evidence in history that Russia will live up to any agreement unless there's an ironclad enforcement protocol. There's no evidence that they've ever done that. So the Ukrainians should have zero confidence in that, so they're not going to do it. Number two, they also understand that if they're not successful, they know what's going to happen. They see the evidence of what happens any place that's under Russian control. And so I don't understand why the chairman or other people in the U.S. in our administration talk about, or frankly in great capitals in Europe, talk about there has to be a negotiated settlement. Why not? I mean, we have an opportunity, an historic opportunity, to change the European security environment for generations by helping Ukraine defeat Russia. If they're not defeated, then they're just going to continue this series. There'll be another Putin, and there'll be another Putin. That will continue forever until they are crushed on the battlefield. So, short answer, it's very unhelpful, and I don't understand where that's coming from. Mark Milley has been a great soldier his whole life. I mean, that guy is tough. He's never been bashful about a fight. So he has a job. He has to carry the administration message, of course, but I've been disappointed that he's not been more vocal about helping Ukraine win.
Linas, I'll come to you in
Yeah.
a second. Just one second.
Sorry.
I just want to ask Bill a question first on what Ben just said. Do you think comments like Milley's reflect divisions within the administration?
So comments like Milley's are in the past. They're about a year ago, almost 9 months ago. We need to look forward to do the kind of things that Ben just said. That is, we need to do everything we can. We need to be unified behind a Ukrainian victory. We want, and what Ben said at the outset is exactly right. If we identify Ukrainian victory as the goal, then other things fall in, other things go, and that's what we need to do. It's less the finger pointing about who said what when. It's getting the United States and the entire coalition, the alliance as well as the broader coalition, focused on Ukraine winning.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, as my grandmother used to say. Linas, please.
Yeah, and just to say that there are some manipulation of feelings, and all that, because when we are saying statements like that, they could be even detrimental, because leaving the hope for Putin to survive. I'm making assumption that Russians were ready for more persistent support from the West. They were ready for that. They were surprised a bit, probably, because red lines were drawn by the West themselves, not by somebody else. And when sometimes sayings also the same story, when you're saying that you cannot defeat nuclear power, nobody going to defeat nuclear power. They're going to clean territory of Ukraine from Russia. This is a big difference. So to take Moscow, it's task for Russians. If they want to get back to civilized world, to get rid of sanctions, it's their business. So nobody going to do that. But when they are saying, again, emotions coming up, and think what we're doing, we have to stop. So this is manipulation. It shouldn't happen.
Alexander, what impact does it have in Ukraine when American officials or European officials talk about the fact that Ukraine should negotiate rather than pursue the war to victory?
I would like to start from the very beginning. Ukraine never chose this war. Ukraine is a victim of brutal, unprovoked Russian aggression like Georgia was in 2008. And aggressor doesn't need any reasons to attack. It's a point only on the capability of to start attack, to start kill and destroy. And of course, when Ukraine was given only 3 days for survival. Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian heroic people, they proved to themselves and to entire world that Ukraine will do everything to win in this game. And Ukraine will do everything to liberate this territory. And we, of course, grateful for our partners. We convinced them as well. We convinced the United States, its politicians, its citizens, that Ukraine could win. And we, at the same time, we received a strong assurance from the West that the West will be with Ukraine till the end, and how matter happened. And of course, we also grateful for our all partners for their insistence and faith to Ukraine. And when we are talking with negotiations, I think Russia is not ready for negotiations. And after all this assurance from the West, we are waiting for and we are hopeful for the next military support, finance support, as well as tougher sanctions for Russia. And I hope this will convince Putin that he couldn't win this game. And of course, he couldn't win never and in any conditions.
Thank you so much. Bill?
Just a real quick
Yep.
point on, on negotiations. President Zelensky has said he's ready to negotiate if the Russians get out of his country.
Right.
He's got a 10-point plan. In fact, as General Hodges talked about a broader counteroffensive. Well, there's also a diplomatic counteroffensive, which the Ukrainians are mounting in Copenhagen and in Jeddah, where they presented this 10-point plan, and the Russians get out of their country. They pay reparations. They return the children and the other people that they've captured. They pay reparations. That's the discussion to have. So there's a willingness to negotiate on those terms.
Let me ask you another question. If I were Ukrainian, I would be very worried about the 2024 election. If I were President Biden, I'd be very worried about the 2024 election. Is there anything that the administration can and should be doing now to lock in support for Ukraine so that it will hold in the years ahead, no matter who is the next president?
Yes, of course. Number one, they should give ATACMS tomorrow so that the counteroffensive can succeed this year. Number two, they ought to push through this next tranche of funding, which you're going to have a whole session on this tomorrow afternoon. But right now, if you put that question to the Congress, it would pass. It would pass. Another big tranche of funds so they ought to do both of those things.
And is there anything sort of institutionally or in terms of guarantees that could be done now to guarantee American support going forward?
So American support going forward is based on what the American people think and feel. And they support the defeat of Russia, and they supported the victory of Ukraine. And that will continue.
Okay, I'd like to start taking questions from the audience now. When I call on you, please give us your name and please limit yourself to a very short question. The woman in the blue dress, please.
Eta Buzishvili, Atlantic Council. Russia has no plans for peace. The only way for having peace is Russia's total defeat and surrender. Is this option on the Western table? Because losing war doesn't mean that Russia will stop fighting. Is West willing to have this option and to get to the stage where Russia is not capable to wage any kind of war at any stage? Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
Certainly, the Russians can lose. Ukrainians can win. They're showing they can win. The Russians, General Hodges talked about the weaknesses on the Russian side. They can lose. And that should not scare us. Someone talked about the concern, I think Minister talked about the concern back in the last days of the Soviet Union, when there were politicians who came through capitals like Kiev and gave a speech called Chicken Kiev speech, saying, don't rock the boat. We're not going to do that again. We're not going to make that mistake again. We're not afraid. We should not be, and I think are not afraid of a Russian loss. General Hodges got. Yeah.
Yeah, look, Crimea is the decisive terrain of this war. Once Crimea is liberated, then it's over. The Russians do not care about Donbass except because it gives them the land bridge from Rostov down to Crimea. So once Crimea has been liberated, it's over. I think some people are anxious about this, Crimea's Holy Land. I bet I passed 2,000 Russian cars this weekend on the drive between here and Kazbeki and back, full of military-age males. Apparently, Georgia is more holy to them than Crimea. They are not interested in joining the army and defending any part of occupied Ukraine. So Putin is an autocrat. He can change the narrative whenever he wants. Once they've lost Crimea, I think he'll come up with a reason to get the hell out of there. And that's how we bring this to a conclusion.
Thank you. Gentleman toward the back, yep.
Good morning. I'm Marek Kocinian from Research Center on Security Policy from Yerevan. I have a question. It's basically the continuation of the question of Jonathan. So it was mentioned that there is no well-integrated and a great plan in Washington towards the situation, to the war in Ukraine and the results of the war. So going deeper than that, I can feel that there are some differences within the current establishment, namely between the Security Council and the State Department on how much of the support should be sent and how deep the US should be involved in the conflict. So I would like to hear some thoughts on that. Why do we see those differences? I hope that they are not a result of personal tastes, let's say, of Sullivan and Blinken. And the continuation of the question in the timeline, the elections in the US are not so far away. So 3 scenarios, basically. If the current administration is re-elected, if there is someone from the Republican Party, and the last, if Trump is re-elected. What are going to be the future with this for Ukraine? Thank you.
First, Bill, since we were talking about this earlier, are there institutional divisions within the government?
Listen, there are institutional divisions within any government, within every government. There's no doubt about that. The question is, can they establish a main goal? And once they do that, as I say, and as others have said, once they say that it's their goal, it's the United States goal, it's the coalition goal, it's the alliance goal for Ukraine to win, then that's what we ought to be pushing them toward.
Does anyone want to take on the second half of the question
about on the election
policy?
On the election, I would predict, nobody is going to survive 91 indictments. I think the former president is going to end up in jail. What worries me is not him running still. What worries me is that there are millions of Americans that would still vote for him. So we have a real domestic challenge there.
There's a question, right there.
Hello, my name is Laura Kelly, a reporter with The Hill. I'd like to go back to talking about Defense Minister Resenkovs' what did we call it? Dismissal. For Alexander, for Ambassador Taylor, his departure comes because of corruption scandals. And as these scandals come to light, people avoiding conscription, overpaying for uniforms and food, how do these actions blow back on US and international support? And what will the incoming defense minister have to do to prove that international assistance is not being misused? Thank you.
Maybe Ambassador first.
Okay.
So, Jonathan, you asked the question earlier on, does this help or hurt? Right. Does this demonstrate a zero tolerance, as the Chargé has mentioned? That's what has to come out of this change from Reznikov to Umerov. It has to be clear that there is no tolerance for corruption. It has to be clear that this is part of a broader effort that has focused on deputy ministers. It's folks, they arrested the institutions, the anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine are now succeeding, are now operating, and they arrested the head of the Constitutional Court and deputy ministers. So this is an indication, it seems to me, that there's no indication that Reznikov had a problem with corruption. He had a problem in the ministry. He was focused on getting weapons. He wasn't focused on managing the ministry. So the second part of your question, Laura, is Mr. Umerov does need to focus on managing that enormous effort that they are going through right now.
Why don't you just pick up on the second part of that question? What does Ukraine need to do to ensure that the West does not get so worried about corruption that it starts to reduce its support?
I think it's the happy stories with the previous one. So we should showing that we move forward, that we do our best in that way, and just that our implementation of our reforms still. And for us, of course, it's, we are all living in social media. We see everything, we can read everything about everybody. So no one can hide. And that will be the best way.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back in the gray shirt or jacket, please keep your, wait for the mic. And please, everyone, keep your questions short so we can fit in a few more.
Michael Washura, Newsweek magazine. 1 year ago on the stage, Ambassador Herbst said correctly that the United States and Europe were not doing enough to transition their productive industrial capacity to making the kinds of weapons that Ukraine needs, which we were already providing. 1 year on, have we taken sufficient steps to ensure that Ukraine has enough armored vehicles, 155 ammunition, bronezhilety, what's that in English? Mine-resistant footwear. Have we taken sufficient steps to make sure they have enough of the things we're already providing? And if not, what concretely needs to be done so that we do?
Ben, why don't you take that? And I want to add to that a point that General Mick Ryan made in a Foreign Affairs article a few days ago, which is that what did he call it, this menagerie of different systems and equipment that the West is providing without very much coordination makes life so difficult for the Ukrainians because they have to manage so many diverse and different and sometimes incompatible weapon systems that it seems like better coordination is needed as well as more stuff.
Okay, so, well, first of all, Mick Ryan is one of the best observers of what's going on. But that reflection of all the different equipment, that's exactly what it looks like inside NATO. So there's a meeting every month where they are, in fact, coordinating what's delivered. So I wouldn't say it's a result of lack of coordination. It's a result of all of us trying to get what we can to Ukraine as quickly as possible. But that does make very difficult logistical challenges because you got so many different parts requirements and different types of ammunition and so on. Now, to Michael's question, it's not sufficient, but the U.S. Army has tripled its ammunition production, 155 millimeter howitzer production in a year. That's significant when you think about where we started from. But the defense industry is not a charity. I mean, there are thousands of employees, very sophisticated and complex supply chains, and so it takes political will in the form of millions of dollars saying we want to increase production of ATACMS or artillery ammunition or helicopters or whatever it is. And that finally started happening in the ammunition production. But the head of Lockheed would probably tell you he's never been approached by the Department of Defense. Hey, would you mind increasing production of ATACMS? So it's about political will.
We got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take 3 questions all together. First, gentleman most of the way in the back in the blue jacket, then this gentleman here, and then finally you, ma'am. And please do keep them very short.
Zviad Skutaridze, independent consultant. First of all, glory to Ukraine, to the heroes fighting in Ukraine, and my great support to Ukraine. It's great to see Alexander as a representative of government of Ukraine, but it's really sad not to have a single representative from the government of Georgia sitting together with you guys. So my question goes to the dragging the leg of like to get enough support, especially F-15s and the air cover. And so it's like 2 dimensions. The first is mainstream media, and I'm talking about the U.S. politics now. The mainstream media and also the Republican tide media. So the messages, key messages, where so they express the kind of the sadness and the tiredness of the American people regarding the the war in Ukraine, and the second, the elections, which is coming in 2024. And we have seen the primary debates of Republicans, and also the kind of opinion in the Democratic Party is not as strong as it was before. So the question is, so how you see the next year? So because I mean it seems as we all want that Ukraine should win the war. How you see the 2024 in these dimensions, as there are a lot of problems in the United States.
Thank you. You, sir, please. Can we get him a microphone, please?
Thank you. Georgi Baramidze, United National Movement Political Secretary. As I'm also have zero responsibility, I'm not in government and not a Vice Prime Minister of President Saakashvili's government, I can be more blunt. First of all, we are all Georgians thankful to any administration. Here, as I noticed, we are everybody for the victory of Ukraine. So, just very briefly, what have done US George Bush administration in 2008 and what is doing now? Linas, my friend, have said that these red lines been drawn by the Western leaders. In 2008, US response to the aggression of Russia was military. US sent 2,000 troops to Georgia back from Iraq.
I'm sorry, but you have to ask the question, please.
Yes. US put in military alert both closest military bases.
Right.
US remained on the ground with the military planes, and United States President have sent 6th Fleet to Georgia. All this was military answer to the aggression. Why can't we use these arguments to convince current administration to do nearly the same things? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Madam.
Thank you for the opportunity, Irina. I'm a visiting lecturer at the Caucasus University. My question, probably more adequate, would be for General Ben Hodges. Who is advising Ukraine on how to fight combined arms warfare without air superiority and long-range artillery? Because as I understand, US has never fought such a war in recent history, and neither has NATO. So what is the advice that Ukraine is getting, how to do this without the equipment it needs? Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you. Okay, so the questions are, what's coming in the year ahead? Some thoughts on the Republicans' position on the war. Why no Georgia-style military response from the direct military response from the United States? And who's advising Ukraine on how to do combined arms in a way that NATO never would? Why don't we start with the last one, Ben, and then work our way forward?
So I don't know who's advising them to do that. Obviously, the point of your question is correct. We would never send an American, British, German, Polish, Georgian soldier into combat without having already achieved overwhelming air superiority. In Desert Storm, we spent 6 weeks, over 100,000 sorties of just airstrikes against the Iraqi forces before we launched the first soldier across on the ground. So I think that this is obviously ill-advised. Ukrainians, I trust General Zaluzhny and his staff. They are exceptional, very professional. They understand operational art. They understand the Russians. They understand their own terrain. They understand the weather, the geography, and they're making the right adaptations. And we need to get rid of the screwdriver and start sending them long-range precision strike capability.
Bill, why is the response to Ukraine, the military response from the United States, been so different than it was with Georgia in 2008?
So, Jonathan, if you and the questioner will allow me, let's take another lesson from 2008. So the other thing that happened in 2008, just before the Russians invaded Georgia, was there was a NATO summit. And at that NATO summit in Bucharest, we remember the Georgians and Ukrainians asked for a membership action plan into NATO. And the United States, remember at that time, we supported that. Right. We supported that. We should have supported it in Vilnius, but that's a different story. But in 2008, we supported it, and the Europeans didn't, in particular the Germans and the French. Had that gone differently, the lesson from 2008 for me is the NATO summit should have given Georgia and Ukraine membership action plan, and we would not be in a war today.
Alexander, last question goes to Ukraine. You're speaking to an audience of international experts, members of civil society, academia, people, all of whom care about Ukraine and want a Ukrainian victory. What can we do, not government, but what can people like us do to help?
First of all, you should believe in our victory. It's the first one. And of course, be united, because the biggest victory will be for Mr. Putin when the West, when the Ukraine, Georgia will be reunited. So it's the most important for us to be united at this war.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our fantastic panel.